So back from our little fire alarm break there.
Yes. Well, I'm glad everybody's okay. We had
Yes.
a little fire alarm, and
No fire, luckily.
yeah, luckily there was no fire. It was just smoke, and it's been taken care of,
A
right?
little bit of a false alarm.
And everyone is alive. So we are back. We are back to continue live. Okay, so I think we stopped at the point where you were describing what resilience meant
Yes.
in training,
Yes.
and how your background or your culture helped you through that process.
Yeah. So one of I think probably the main thing from my background that helped me through that process was, well, I guess maybe there's two things. The first being that since I was the different kid in high school and some in middle school, there was different type of adversity for sure, and maybe a different intensity of adversity, excuse me. But it's not like there wasn't some form of adversity there. So I think just having dealt with a little bit of adversity in my past, prior to the military, even if, like I said, it was different. But then also the fact that my family always kind of just instilled a hard work ethic in me. So whenever it felt really crappy or whatever in training, I don't know, I just focused on just got to do the job and do it well. And just kind of focusing on the task at hand was able to just kind of help me get through until the task was over. And then when the task was over, I could kind of look back and be like, oh, look, I'm done. I did it. I did the 12-mile road march, the 6-mile whatever the task would have been at the moment.
Cool. And I again connecting this back to your background, and generally, when people's economic conditions sometimes also kind of shapes how resilient they could be.
Sure.
Because if you have little, you sort of have to really figure out how to survive on that little.
Yeah, when you don't have a lot of resources,
Exactly.
you have to learn how to be resourceful. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's not like when people talk about, oh, when you have little, you have to survive with a little. When people talk about that, it's kind of generalized. But in real effect, when you have little, there are certain things, certain skills that you develop, like you are able to prioritize things that you feel like this is like most important.
Sure.
And before you move on to the next important. So in other words, you sort of deny yourself certain things, which sort of I can explain. I can describe that as some kind of building discipline.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Yes. So, and that discipline could translate into resilience as well.
Yeah. It could.
Yeah. So, would you describe that kind of situation, given your own economic, family economic background? Would you say that you see that kind of situation playing out in your experience in the military?
I don't know necessarily that I would say it's got a whole lot to do with the economic background that I had. I certainly didn't come from a family that was as well off as some of the ones that were around me, especially in that more affluent area that we had moved to. But my family, there was always food on the table, and we were fortunate to always have a stable home. We were fortunate to always have stable power and heating and enough food for us all to eat. So I don't know that I would say that necessarily had a huge role to play.
Okay, cool. All right, now let's actually get into your military career.
Sure.
Were you ever deployed?
I was, yeah.
About how many times?
In the kind of contemporary sense, twice.
Twice.
The Army defines deployment as I think their exact definition is 30 days or longer away from your home station.
Okay.
Your home station being like just the base that you're stationed at. So by that definition, it was more than twice.
Okay.
But in kind of like the contemporary understanding of going overseas,
yeah.
it was just twice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And which countries did you serve in?
I spent 9 months in Iraq, and while I was in the process of traveling to and from Iraq, I spent a very, very little bit of time in Qatar, and then like a couple weeks here and there in Kuwait. And then I spent about a month in Ethiopia as more of a training rotation, more like a training kind of deployment. And for a couple days on the front end and the back end of that, we spent some time in Djibouti as well.
Oh, okay. Nice. Okay, so now this is going to be a tough question.
Okay.
In all of your experiences
Mhm.
overseas, which one would you say was the toughest for you? Which one
toughest
was the
for me?
Yeah.
I think personally, the toughest for me was I had gone through a pretty bad breakup actually, like the weekend before I went to Iraq. So I wasn't exactly in the headspace that I expected to be in when I left. So I think that was hard because there was a part of me that didn't really take like any time to like mourn the loss of the relationship or grieve or. And not that those words might be a little too strong for a breakup, but those are the ones that came to my head, so we'll stick with them. I never really like kind of processed the breakup, I guess, and so that kind of kept like popping back up throughout the deployment when things were quiet, or if I was like on a guard shift and it was like late at night and my mind started wandering. So that I'd say that was tough, just kind of coming to terms with the fact that a relationship which I had placed like a lot of emphasis on had ended, and ended abruptly and unexpectedly right before I left. And so that kind of amplified maybe a little bit of the feelings of uncertainty that came with like being in an unfamiliar place, being around unfamiliar people. I mean, of course, I was with my unit. I was still pretty new to my unit at the time though, so I hadn't gotten to know some of the people quite that well yet. Yeah. I'd say that was probably the toughest part of the experience for me personally.
So, would you say that the breakup is it attributable to the fact that you were going overseas? Or your military enlistment, did that play a role?
It might not have helped.
Okay.
I'm willing to bet it didn't help.
Okay.
But the relationship itself was just not the healthiest of relationships. And I don't think I saw it at the time.
Okay.
And, you know, I played some of the role in making it unhealthy, and the girl who I was in the relationship with certainly played her role in making it unhealthy as well. So I think it just kind of all culminated to kind of be the end for that relationship.
So would you describe that whole experience as it created some vulnerabilities in you while deployed?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, because there were certainly some times where where I kind of like was just can't think about this right now. Got to override it. We'll deal with it later. Push it in a box, tuck it away. And then there was times where I didn't have to be like as actively focused on something, and that box started to kind of creep out. And be a little bit of a distraction or a little bit of an uncomfortable kind of headspace to sit in.
Okay. Okay.
So I'd say
Okay.
maybe a little bit.
All right. Cool. Now, what about comeback experience? Did you have any comeback experience where you felt like, man, this is not really what I signed up for?
Kind of, I guess.
Okay.
So we had very, very strict rules of engagement, which, rules of engagement are necessary. So I understand, but ours were pretty strict, especially compared to some of the rules of engagement that had been put in place in the past. So I think there was a surprise there
Mhm.
because we carried all this firepower, and then we basically got told, don't use it unless this, and this are happening.
Mhm.
So that was interesting. But I think I started to kind of go down a tangent and forgot the other part of your question. What was there more to that?
No.
Okay.
No. Actually, I was just asking, like, in terms of comeback, did you have any experience that you felt like, oh man, this is like a vulnerable state. I find myself in a vulnerable state.
Yeah.
And the way that you are describing it, I mean, a lot of people would not even think of it this way, but the military is seen as a defensive kind of position, right? A defensive
Sometimes, yeah.
role, but sometimes the rules can make you vulnerable too.
Yes.
Because, like you're saying, if you have the rules and the rules are saying you're carrying all of these, firepower, but don't use it unless this happens, and basically, unless this happens, that one of the things on the list could wipe out an entire unit.
Potentially.
Yeah, potentially.
Potentially.
Yeah. So
likelihood probably small to wipe an entire unit.
Yeah.
But it could. Yeah.
Yeah, if you say, you have to wait till you become a target. Say,
Mhm.
for example, if that's the rule, I'm just speculating.
Mhm.
If that's the rule, wait till you are sure that you are the target of firepower, enemy firepower.
Mhm.
Okay, now if the enemy firepower is in the form of a bomb,
Mm-hmm.
it can wipe you all out, right?
It sure can. It sure can.
And here you are with all the ammunitions and all the weapons that you could actually fight back. You
Yeah.
could fight, but you are restrained, and that people don't think about that. But that is a point of being vulnerable as well. Right?
Yeah. There was certainly the. Yeah, I guess I was thinking more like kind of mental or emotional vulnerability.
I understand that. I was just throwing
yeah, so-
something into the whole discussion.
Yeah, and even without the rules of engagement being what they were, and again, for some of them, understandably so, because you have like civilian considerations, and you don't want to do damage to things that aren't your target. So there were certainly physical vulnerabilities, and I think regardless of what the rules of engagement were, that's kind of just an inherent part of combat.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say a defensive role, actually, because the military can of course be both defensive and offensive. But we were more of a defensive kind of advising capacity for my unit in the role that we played during that deployment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
some of it just kind of felt like waiting for something to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then also, just to throw in another point, sometimes even if you have all these rules, and I think it applies to all service people that deal with potentially violent situations, like even the police, for example, you need to make moral judgments.
Yes.
And that could also put you in a vulnerable situation. Someone that you say, oh well, this is maybe someone, a civilian minding his own business, could actually be the one that is about to target you.
Yeah.
Right. So some of these decisions that you're taking, you're trying to balance it out with some moral judgment, emotional, stability, an emotionally stable decision, and going through such processes in a potentially violent and life-threatening situation, it could be a point of vulnerability as well.
Yeah, it can be a bit unnerving.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was not directly presented with a situation where I had to be that judgment.
Yeah.
Granted, so like the rules of engagement were there to help guide that judgment.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Because people might abuse it if they were not.
And people have in the past. But yeah, luckily, any situation where there could have been any form of judgment like that, I was at the time pretty bottom of the totem pole in terms of rank, bottom rung of the ladder almost. So most of those decisions were being made above my head, and I just kind of, was able to follow directives and follow orders. And due to the role that we were playing, we weren't in as offensive of a role. So due to the role that we were playing, there was not too many situations where we had to like really step into those gray areas and make that moral decision.
Cool. So you would say that your experience, you did not. No, I wouldn't say that you did not. But okay, let me ask this in a question form so that you explain to us however you feel fit.
Okay.
So, in your combat experience, you would say that it was exactly as you pictured things to be?
No.
Before joining?
I would say no. So one of the things that was certainly different to when I joined compared to like my experiences overseas. When I joined, I was not aware of like drone warfare as much. But when I was in Iraq, it was becoming more and more common of a thing for the ISIS. We were fighting against ISIS or advising the fight against ISIS. Is probably a little bit more of an accurate way to say it. So we would be faced with the prospect of basically they would have like a quadcopter drone, that same kind of style that you would like see video footage from the mountains or something of, but they would rig some sort of explosives to it, and they would come and drop the explosives or try to fly the drone at you, or they would also, just like America has, you know, our different surveillance ISR feeds and drones that we can fly way up high and see like who's on the ground doing what. They would use them in a similar capacity to that as well, so they could try to like refine the aim or the accuracy of their mortars, their artillery, other forms of indirect fire, scout out our positions. So I think that was certainly a difference from what I expected.
Okay, that's great. My next question.
Okay.
So you served in the military for 5 years, and then you decided that it was not for you, and so you became a civilian again.
Not quite.
Okay.
So I actually got put out of the military for some medical reasons.
Okay.
So it was a little bit less of a choice.
Okay.
And so they basically were like, you can get out now, or we can try to address your medical issues, and we probably won't succeed to a point where we can get you back to serviceable for the job that you're in, and we can push you out later.
Okay.
So I was like, well, rather than delay the inevitable, let's start the next chapter and get to where we're going.
Okay. So how was transitioning back into civilian life like, and how would you say that your experience in the military helped you, or maybe continuing to help you in your current civilian life?
I think it helped me in the sense that it really broadened my perspectives, and it really like taught me to value other perspectives. So I think whereas before the military I maybe acknowledged and accepted difference, I really started to value difference a little bit more during and shortly after the military. It was a very like informative experience for me to get to go to Iraq and to go to Ethiopia and see cultural differences and see different ways of processing the world and processing the information that we receive about the world. So I think that probably helped in my transition of, I'm so used to everything being so regimented and structured and got to be done this way. And so it was challenging to come out into the civilian world where all of a sudden all that structure was lacking. But I think being able to kind of recognize and value different perspectives and getting to kind of embrace different perspectives helped me transition a little bit and see like, okay, life is different now, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And kind of interpret how to handle different social situations, because the social norms and what's considered socially appropriate or acceptable in the military is very different than what's considered professionally or socially acceptable in the civilian world. So just kind of being able to be willing and able to embrace different perspectives of my own.
Okay, that's great. All right, last question.
Alrighty.
If you had the opportunity, would you enlist in the military again, or let's put it this way,
Okay.
what would you tell your younger self if you had a choice to join the military?
I would probably tell him to go for it. I if I had to go back and do it all again, even knowing what I know now, I think I would do it again. It was a very very formative experience of my life. It taught me. I think first off, it caused me to mature a lot, which is something that 18-year-old me certainly needed. And so that was very valuable. I got some really incredible experiences, got to meet some really cool people, some really incredible people. Got to do some really cool stuff like shooting guns through night vision was pretty fun. I rappelled out of a helicopter at one point, like that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think I would have told myself to still do it, but maybe to do it with a little bit more of an open mind, and a little bit less of a perception that I know what's going to happen or know necessarily like what the best thing is all the time. Because that was a little bit of a rude awakening for me when I got into the military, despite the fact that people had told me my whole life, you know, I didn't want to listen to them. But yeah, I think that was, that I'd go back and do it.
Cool. I said it was my last question, but this, just to help people out there who
Sure.
might be planning on joining the military, what are some of the, should I say, skills that you think people should develop if they intend to join the military?
Sure. So one I would think is critical thinking. It's very valuable, of course, and I think a lot of us have like a very black or white perception of the military when really there's a lot of gray, right? When you join the military, your life is not necessarily your own anymore. You sacrifice certain rights and luxuries that you're used to as a civilian. Certain actions that the military has taken in the past or will take after you were in the military will then be conflated with you in some way. Even if you had very little to do with it in reality. And you know, of course, the fact that your supervisors are not always going to have everyone's best interest, are not always going to make the most ethical or logical or reasonable choice. So I think critical thinking, to be able to evaluate those situations, tact, to be able to handle situations where, you know, there was a point where I was a junior leader and a more senior leader than myself wanted my guys to go do something that I just disagreed with. And so to protect my guys, I had to stick my neck out and basically disagree with him. But because of like the rank and the structure and, all sorts of different reasons, I had to do so in a very, I had to be careful about how I approached the situation. I couldn't just go in there and be like, you're stupid, right? So tact, critical thinking, and then problem-solving skills are probably helpful, and of course physical fitness, because even though I would argue the military has probably grown a little bit softer, you're still gonna have to do some runs and some push-ups, and all, you gotta be reasonably in shape at the least.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you for having me as your first guest on the podcast, and thank you more so for starting the podcast. To be perfectly honest, I was less excited to be on it than I was about the fact that you now have it. So I'm honored that you asked me to be a guest, and looking forward to see where this goes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, guys. It has been a very, very wonderful conversation. I think we jumped a lot of interesting part of it just because of time, but I'm confident that at a point in time we will probably come back and have some extensive conversation, especially concerning his actual military experience, all the deployments and all that kind of stuff. But for now, we try to give an overview of his life and how his culture has really shaped it up to be what it is. So in the future, we might come back and have some more discussions. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.